The Community Development and Housing Committee is being called to order. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Good morning, everyone. It's 10:01 a.m. As a reminder to all in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Also, as a reminder to all meeting attendees seeking parking validation for today's meeting, please be sure to scan the QR code located on the back table near the chamber's entrance to claim your discount. If you do not already have a Metropolis account, you will need your license plate number to set up the account in advance of receiving your discount. Please be sure to complete this prior to the end of today's meeting, as the QR code will be removed at the conclusion of the meeting. Calling the roll, Mr. Hauser.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Patrick Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Schlepper.
Here.
Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. And let the record reflect that Council President Miller is also in attendance.
Clerk, is there any public comment?
Not at this time. We're going to do the testimony after.
Sounds good. Members, you guys have the January 27th meeting minutes before you. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Clerk, will you call the item in the record?
Ordinance 2025-0011, an ordinance enacting the right of county renters to pay to stay and declaring the necessity that this ordinance become immediately effective.
Thank you. Council President, did you want to say any before words?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and to everybody here, this is our second hearing on pay to stay, and in preparation for this hearing, we sent out notices far and wide. We sent out information to every mayor and council president in the county, and we interacted with the Realtors Association and other interested parties. We made efforts, as suggested at the last meeting, to contact landlords, and our hope today was just to encourage everyone who had any comments or input about this legislation to bring it forward. We've received a number of items in writing which have been circulated, and in addition, we have people here that are going to bring us testimony. I don't intend that we should vote on the legislation today. We're going to need time to digest everything that we hear today, and to work through the legal issues involved in this legislation, as well as the policy issues. But hopefully we'll have a good hearing today and bring a lot of information forward for our consideration. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Council President. Who is here to speak to the item? We can go one at a time. Do you have a list?
Elizabeth Zach.
Good morning, council members. My name is Elizabeth Zach. I'm a supervising attorney with the Housing Practice Group at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. And in the Housing Practice Group, we represent tenants primarily in evictions. And the number one reason for evictions is non-payment of rent. Now, there are a few things I wanted to say about this proposed pay-to-stay legislation. The first is that the pay-to-stay remedy helps landlords and tenants avoid court. One way for tenants to utilize pay-to-stay is to pay all past due rent and late fees before an eviction is filed. Codifying a clear process benefits both sides. Landlords receive the full amount due without turnover costs, And then tenants can avoid an eviction and all its destabilizing effects. Without pay to stay, tenants may not always be able to resolve those delinquencies, even if they have the money, because of confusion over late fee calculations and because of property management policies that limit pre-filing or pre-hearing communications once an account is flagged for eviction status. So a county-wide standard can reduce these friction points. It would encourage direct and prompt payment. It would avoid the adversarial court process. It would shift problem solving back in the hands of landlords and tenants. It promotes communication between the landlord and tenant, and it would maintain or even improve the landlord-tenant relationship. Again, without court, without lawyers mucking things up. Now, the second thing is a county ordinance promotes equitable treatment of tenants across municipal borders. So tenants who live in municipalities with a pay-to-stay ordinance have more rights than the tenants in neighboring communities that don't have that pay-to-stay protection. So for example, within the Garfield Heights Municipal Court, tenants living minutes apart can face divergent outcomes. The Maple Heights tenant is allowed to catch up on their rent and may even be able to avoid court. If an eviction is filed, the court would then oversee the tenant's payment, the pay-to-stay sum. Now, the Garfield Heights tenant who lives minutes away and may even have the same landlord does not have those same rights. That tenant cannot avoid eviction by offering their pay-to-stay sum. And if the case does go to court, the court has no authority to oversee a transfer and require the landlord to accept that rent. So this proposed pay-to-stay ordinance puts all tenants in the county on equal footing. And that's important because of the kind of temporary or transient nature of tenancies. These are either month-to-month or year-to-year tenancies. So this isn't someone who moves into Garfield Heights and buys a house and is there for 10, 15, 20 years. They get to know waste collection rules, city council members, property tax, income tax for the city. It's important for people who move from community to community to have the same rights within our county. Now, the third point I'd like to make is that pay-to-stay is already working in some of our cities. In one case where legal aid represented a single mother, the landlord demanded the mother pay more than her rent and her late fees to reinstate her tenancy. The court's enforcement of pay-to-stay ensured that the mother and her child stayed in their home and that they were not induced to pay more than they were contractually obligated. Now, I also would like to address a couple amendments that the council may be considering. The first is a possible one-shot or one-chance amendment. So tenants, of course, would like to see pay to stay in any form for the county rather than nothing at all. However, to address some of the council's concerns, there is a financial incentive for tenants to be on time. It doesn't help a tenant who is just using pay to stay month after month after month. The financial incentive is they don't have to pay the late fees. Now, if a tenant does have to use pay to stay a couple of times, there's also the incentive for them to still be on time with rent and try to avoid using pay to stay at all because they want to maintain a good relationship with their landlord for a number of reasons. Not least of which is that at the end of that year-long tenancy, the landlord has no obligation to renew the lease. And so if the tenant has used pay to stay multiple times and kind of garnered the ire of the landlord, that tenancy is probably not going to be renewed. Now, that's for someone who has a year-long lease. It's also very common for tenants to have month-to-month tenancies. And nothing in pay-to-stay prohibits a landlord from ending a month-to-month tenancy, even if the tenant is current in rent. That's current Ohio law. And so again, I don't think we're going to see repeat offenders, if you will, or repeat users of pay to stay. It's always financially in the tenant's best interest to pay rent on time, and pay to stay does not change that. Now, another possible amendment up for consideration is to require the tenant to pay some type of legal fees. And I will say, I think that discourages one of the goals of pay to stay, which is, again, to avoid courts altogether, avoid the filing, avoid courts, keep lawyers out of it, and really improve the communication between the landlord and the tenant. And more importantly, I also think it's prohibited by law. Ohio Revised Code 532113 bars landlords from requiring tenants to pay any type of legal fees. That is already existing Ohio law, and so I wouldn't want to see the council include something that would only get struck down. And so I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak on pay to stay. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Appreciate you coming in. Committee members, do you guys have any questions?
Thank you very much for this very useful and instructive testimony. I have a couple questions, and I'm going to address them to you, or you may not know, and if anybody else that comes down later on can help with these questions, it would be valuable as well. And the first one is that there's been a lot of back and forth over whether this, whether local pay-to-stay legislation conflicts with Ohio Code Section 5321, that whether the state basically preempts all landlord-tenant aspects, and so my question is whether you know of any cases where this has been contested in court and where a local pay-to-stay ordinance has either been upheld or has been invalidated. And the second question is whether you personally know of cases where tenants have used pay-to-stay multiple times in relatively short succession. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Council President. I am not aware, I do not believe there are any examples of pay-to-stay being invalidated within Cuyahoga County or within the state of Ohio. I don't see Chapter 5321 preventing Cuyahoga County Council from taking any action on pay-to-stay. It's well within the purview of local government to build upon some of the baseline structures for the landlord-tenant relationship that already exist in 5321. I am aware of Cleveland Heights decision that specifically upholds pay-to-stay, and that was in one case where legal aid represented a tenant. It was also in a case where legal aid wasn't involved, and so that was very heartening to see the law being applied across the board. And then in other courts, pay-to-stay has been applied, but there is not necessarily always a written decision in eviction cases. We've seen it in Lakewood, we've seen it in Euclid, and I know it's used in the Cleveland Housing Court as well. And then, let's see, and Council President, I apologize. Your second question was asking if we've seen any repeat users of pay-to-stay. I have not, in the legal aid housing practice, I've not seen that. And again, for the reasons I said before, it's always in the tenant's best interest financially to avoid late fees and then to secure a good relationship with the landlord and ideally get that lease renewed. It's in the tenant's best interest to not use pay-to-stay too often.
Thank you.
Well, we thank you. I only have one question. Does legal aid have any data or information for cities that have pay to stay compared to cities that don't, and if it affects eviction rates. So, for example, Garfield or Cleveland Heights versus cities that don't have pay to stay.
I really wish we did. And the Ohio Supreme Court governs data reporting for the different municipal courts, so that includes the county's 13 different municipal courts. And unfortunately, right now, the courts are only required to report the number of eviction filings and then the disposition of that case. We don't even technically know the reason for different eviction filings. Anecdotally, it's far and away because of non-payment of rent, but there are no specific statistics to back that up. One interesting thing that could come with countywide pay-to-stay legislation is an actual ability to monitor this across multiple municipal courts, where we really just haven't been able to do that yet.
We appreciate it. We appreciate you guys coming in today. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
One question. So if a tenant is 3 months or so behind, right, then hasn't the landlord already had to go to court and file for an eviction if it looks like they're not going to get paid? And if the pay to stay would allow the resident there to make up that amount of money that they owe, isn't the landlord out the money that it takes to file the eviction?
Thank you for the question. And so the good answer to that is no. So first of all, there is no set time frame a landlord has to abide by. Some landlords file right away. The tenant is late, they give them 3-day notice. They've filed an eviction within the next 1 to 2 weeks, and they're in court. Some landlords wait it out a couple months. If the landlord is in that scenario where they've been generous, they've waited 3 months, the requirement is that the tenant not only pay all of the month that is due up through that present month, and the late fees from each of those months, but also the landlord's filing fees, which typically are $150 to $200, depending on which court we're in. And so the landlord would not be out that money.
All right, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we thank you for coming in today.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, let the record reflect that Councilmember Simon is in attendance. Chris Canary.
Good morning, all. I'm Chris Canary with the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research. It's an honor to be here speaking with you today, and I'm just so grateful that County Council is considering this legislation as a critical civil rights and equity issue in our community. Eviction disproportionately impacts communities of color, single female-headed households, families with children, folks with disabilities, people experiencing domestic violence, right? So, and it has terrible consequences for folks down the line after facing eviction. It's harder to get housing again, right, once you have an eviction on your record. And even in communities where we've had, like in Cleveland, the record ceiling, you still have to answer truthfully if you apply for housing to say whether or not you've been evicted, right, in the past, or had an eviction action filed against you, even though that record won't show up if a housing provider does just a docket search once it's been sealed. So, and we've got just terrible and persistent issues with affordability. That's an ongoing concern in our community. We just don't have enough affordable housing, and so people struggle, right, to make ends meet. One thing can come up in our lives and derail our ability to pay rent that month, right, or throw us off or put us behind. So we do support at the Fair Housing Center the draft legislation, and we encourage 2 potential amendments. So as was discussed earlier by Elizabeth Zach from Legal Aid, we have other communities, 8 other communities in the county, right, have already enacted pay-to-stay legislation. And 6 of those communities actually allow folks to pay to stay up until the execution of the writ of restitution, so of the eviction judgment itself. So not just through the hearing date, but before set out, right? Which just gives families a little bit more time, right, to get it together, to be able to stabilize their tenancies. And really, what's the harm there versus at the hearing date, right? When, in fact, the issue really is just about whether or not the housing provider has gotten the money owed, right, to them. So we would really encourage consideration of that potential amendment. The other thing is to ensure that families are only responsible for the late fees on the portion of the rent for which they're responsible. So that's in the City of Cleveland's ordinance. It's also in the City of Cincinnati's pay-to-stay ordinance. And the important thing there is for families who are receiving subsidy that they would not be penalized with a late fee or assessed a late fee on their responsibility when it's, for example, the subsidy is in play, is late, but is coming, right? So that was the other sort of thing that we would encourage consideration on in this ordinance. So that's it. I'll thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Committee members, do you have any questions? Seeing none, we thank you.
Thank you.
Molly Marcin, and I apologize, Marcin Kinovix.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. My name is Molly Marcin-Kevisis. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this legislation. I'm here representing the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless. I've worked with NEOC in a number of capacities over the last several years and worked with 8 municipalities who have passed pay-to-stay during the height of the pandemic. I know we have some legal folks here who can answer questions. I come to this space being a tenant advocate, being someone who has worked in a lot of settings where we are trying to educate renters on their rights. And sometimes that work can be really hard because there aren't a lot of legal protections that tenants have, especially in the state of Ohio. Something I read recently that was interesting, just to kind of contextualize this ordinance, is that in France, they're currently in this period called winter's truce, where they actually don't even, that landlords aren't even allowed to file an eviction from November 1st to March 31st. And if you narrow it in the state of Ohio, under the law, you can, legally be a day late and $1 short on rent and still get evicted. I know the U.S. is different from France, but there are 15 other states around the country that actually have a grace period ranging from 3 days to a couple of weeks. And under Ohio law, we have a day technically. And when you're doing tenant education work and tenants are calling the Homeless Coalition thinking that when they get a 3-day notice, that actually means they have to be out now, it's really hard to develop a tenant empowerment when they ask, like, well, legally, what right do I have? And that's technically the truth. And I do think it's important, too, that like what tenants don't know can't help them. And the way that this legislation is written is it spells out in so many ways what happens. It provides clear guidance to the tenant and to the landlord about what happens. And I think that Legal Aid raises a good point that, Cleveland has a housing court, but a lot of eviction proceedings are heard in a municipal court setting. And if you have a tenant living in Bedford and a tenant living in South Euclid, there's kind of mismatched guidance, and this creates kind of an equal footing to understand that this ordinance can hold in a specific way all across the county. And another thing is that, the point of a late fee, the point of court filings is to disincentivize going to court. And I don't think like the purpose of a tax, the purpose of a fee would really incentivize anyone who's scrambling to get just even the amount altogether. And I think that just kind of shows that this sort of protection that would be codified is trying to encourage mediation overall. And the last thing I'll add too is that, I know what's important too is that landlords have this concern that like, if this is a protection around late payment, what if there are other issues going on with the tenant? But I know that under this legislation, this doesn't prohibit landlords for bringing an eviction filing for any other reason. And I think just broadly too, there's kind of this argument that landlords are good actors and they're going to try and mediate. And I think given the impacts on education, future evictions and how that impacts housing, and the fact that eviction impacts women of color who are single heads of household, that we should kind of have an equal way of looking at the law and kind of assuming that tenants are acting in good faith too. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Committee members, you guys have any questions? I just have 2 comments. I agree 100% with the grace period. I think being late 3 to 5 days compared to 3 months are 2 totally different things. I also agree with you. This legislation does not hinder a landlord from evicting for another reason. This is simply just lack of payment. So we appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you.
Katie Basia.
Morning. My name's Katie Basia. I am speaking today on behalf of the Akron-Cleveland Association of Realtors, or ACAR. We represent approximately 6,000 real estate professionals across Cuyahoga Summit and Portage counties. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on Ordinance 02025-0011. ACAR supports policies that promote housing stability and access. While we understand the intent behind this proposal, housing policy must be grounded in data and reflect how the rental market actually operates. Cuyahoga County's rental housing market is concentrated in a small number of municipalities, primarily Cleveland, Lakewood, and Cleveland Heights, many of which already have pay-to-stay or similar ordinances in place. Much of the rest of the county is largely owner-occupied and experiences far less rental activity. Given this, it is unclear how a countywide mandate would meaningfully improve outcomes beyond what is already being addressed locally. As noted in our letter, housing court data shows that pay-to-stay has been used only in a small number of cases over the past 3 years, despite thousands of eviction filings, raising questions about its effectiveness and improving long-term housing stability. From an operational standpoint, the ordinance raises additional concerns. According to the National Apartment Association, 93 cents of every dollar is allocated to fixed operating costs, such as mortgages, insurance, taxes, maintenance, and utilities. When rent is delayed or unpaid, these costs continue. Under Ohio evictions process, even basic compliance and court-related steps can result in expenses approaching $1,000, well beyond what the ordinance allows property owners to recover. If pay-to-stay policies are considered, ACAR believes they must include reasonable guardrails, such as limiting use to 1 per lease term and allowing recovery of legitimate costs tied to late payment or legal action. Without these protections, the policy shifts financial risk onto housing providers and may discourage continued investment in rental housing. There are more effective, data-driven ways to address housing stability, including targeted rental assistance, coordination with social services providers, and policies that increase housing supply. ACAR appreciates the opportunity to comment and looks forward to working with the county on balanced and practical solution to protect residents while maintaining a stable and functional rental housing market. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilman?
Can you repeat those? Thank you. Can you repeat those 3? I heard you say targeted rental assistance.
Yes. So it's find it, targeted rental assistance, coordination with social service providers, and policies that increase housing supply.
Molly, it has been said that pay-to-stay will make the landlord whole. And that's pretty much a solution. What is your position on that?
Honestly, I think all questions should probably be directed towards Jamie McMillan at ACAR. She was unavailable to be here today, and I think she was the one that sent the letter over, so I think I would probably recommend that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
Scott Crochelle.
Good morning. My name is Scott Crayley. I'm a landlord on Cleveland's west side. My partner is over here, and I own and operate 33 units, mostly duplexes, and one 15-unit building we've been rehabbing and bringing back online. We serve a mix of tenants, working families, voucher holders, some higher income folks who help balance the books. Pretty typical small business housing. I'm not a big operator. I'm the guy fixing furnaces during a cold snap. I'll be on my way after this to go deal with an electrical problem. I'm on call at night, and I know my tenants by name. And we take pride in what we do. We're trying to provide safe, stable, and affordable housing and make an honest living doing it. So I'm here to say clearly, I support pay to stay. Because eviction isn't just paperwork. It's not just part of the business. It's trauma, it's kids switching schools, it's job loss, it's shelter stays, it's the whole social safety net kicking in. And we all pay for that. I've seen estimates that an eviction costs the public about $6,500 per household in downstream services, shelters, child services, courts, healthcare, all of it. My property tax bill this year is over $40,000. I pay it. I grumble in February and in July, but I pay it because I believe in supporting the community. What I don't want to pay for is avoidable evictions. Here's the simple math. If a tenant shows up with the rent in hand and a landlord refuses it and pushes forward with an eviction anyway, now the county eats the $6,500 bill. That's not a housing policy problem, that's a choice. And the rest of us taxpayers are subsidizing that choice. Why should responsible landlords be subsidizing the worst operators in the market? Because that's what happens without pay to stay. Most of us, the decent relationship-based landlords, we already take the rent. Of course we do, why wouldn't we? Getting paid and keeping a stable tenant is just common sense. So for most of us, this law changes nothing. But for the small number of folks who churn tenants, refuse payments, and treat eviction like a business model, it levels the playing field. It stops rewarding bad behavior. And let's be honest, if a tenant has the full rent and you still want them out, then it's probably not about money. We already have legal tools for lease violations that aren't about non-payment. So opposing pay to stay isn't about protecting landlords. It's about protecting the worst practices. Look, I get that small landlords can struggle with cash flow. If that's the concern, let's talk about CDFI loans or lines of credit. There are better tools for that. But incentivizing eviction is not a small business support strategy. At the end of the day, this is simple. If someone can pay the rent and a landlord can be made whole, there's no good reason to make that family homeless and send taxpayers the bill. Pay to stay protects tenants, it protects taxpayers, and it protects responsible landlords who are doing things the right way. Please don't design policy around the worst actors. Level the playing field for the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today. I think one of the voices we were missing at the last committee meeting was from a landlord. I will open it up for questions from committee members. Councilman.
Thank you for being here today. As a small business owner, you mentioned one of the tools is having a line of credit to help in those situations. Do you actually have a line of credit?
I do. I would say that a lot of times when we talk about policies like this, the folks that we're concerned about in the market are probably smaller than what we are. I'm full-time. I've built, some capital reserves because I think that's an essential part of running a responsible landlording business. You got to be able to float a bit. I work in Cleveland, which is one of the most impoverished cities in the country, and so late payments isn't some terrible thing that happens. It's one of the things my tenants deal with. And to be a responsible business owner and deal with my clientele responsibly, I have to be able to anticipate that, engage with them, know them, and collaboratively work together to solve those problems. It's just not cost effective to do it otherwise. So I think there's a lot of tools that could support better practices across the board for low-income, low-capacity landlords. You know, I think about that a lot, and I'd love to be part of efforts to build those tools because I think that regulations are really important, but so are incentives for the right kind of practices. So that's one of many I could imagine that would potentially smooth this sort of issue out. Stronger mediation, a stronger mediation environment would be better as well. We've worked with the Cleveland Mediation Center at times. We, as I think someone else said, we connect with social services. We do so preemptively. We let our tenants know who the local social service providers are in the neighborhood when they move in, because that's helping us. I mean, that's just good business. Stable tenants make for a stable business. And, if smaller landlords who don't have the capacity or the full-time engagement that we do could benefit from knowing some of those practices as well, that's the sort of thing that helps stabilize the market, On the flip side, I think, if you've got bad actors out there who are just churning the market and creating instability, that costs me on both ends in terms of tax money paid to help those folks on the other side, as well as just a less stable tenant base. Those same people become my clients, and now they've got a history of eviction, some bout with homelessness, potential, substance issues, everything that goes along with it. It's a whole package.
You described some of the landlords who might not support this being as bad actors. Would you characterize them all as bad actors, or maybe some that just don't have all the tools?
Yeah, I'm not trying to paint with a sweeping brush here. And I know that there's 1,000 different ways to do landlording. There's 1,000 different neighborhoods you can do it in, and the challenges are different in each one. And I think there's a lot of people who are working really hard, and this business can grind you. I mean, believe me, I know. But I think it's a spread of folks, and I think that in some cases you do have people taking advantage of weaknesses in the system. I think that's probably larger actors. That's probably, more corporate operations. I think some of the smaller folks struggle to find the tools that would help them find alternate paths. And so again, I think it's really, you got to have a two-part strategy. One is to sort of close off options that are antisocial, and the other is to build tools that are pro-social. And then reach out and connect with folks, because I think a lot of landlords are trying to do the right thing. It just gets tricky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in. I really appreciate your testimony. Just didn't catch your last name. Could you give it to me again?
My last name is Krahle.
And how do you spell that?
Kroehle. It's got a bunch of extra letters.
Okay, thanks again. It was most helpful.
Just have a couple questions before you go. So you say you have 33 units. Are they all in the Cleveland area?
Yeah, they're on the west side of Cleveland.
Okay, and Cleveland already has pay to stay.
It does.
I was wondering, have you ever dealt with pay to stay in all of your units?
I have not. As it was noted earlier, this is a small incidence sort of thing. I think that, I think that a lot of times people will kind of work it out before court, and then you're not going to hear about it. And then I think there's probably a small number of operators who are really kind of pushing that line and needing that right to be invoked. Personally, again, we're on the ground. We live on the west side of Cleveland. We know our tenants, and they do have problems. I mean, we have people who fall behind with some regularity. It is a fact of life in Cleveland that renters struggle financially, and we stay in touch with them. We've gotten really good at navigating people through rental assistance, which has been an enormous blessing for a lot of tenants. It's also been a boon to landlords. I mean, an infusion of millions of dollars into the rental market on behalf of the federal government has absolutely pushed those rents higher and higher, because you're just pouring money onto the demand side. So, we help folks navigate those services. We help connect them with the centers. We know some case workers, case managers that we can put people in touch with. And usually you work it out. And at the end of the day, it's better to get made whole and not end up in court and keep a tenant. I don't want to turn a unit. It's costly. It takes time. I do this work myself. And if I got to turn a unit over, we have high standards for ourselves, because I want to have self-respect in what I'm doing here. And so it takes time and it takes money to put a new person in a unit. It's always going to be more cost-effective if I can find a way to help that person stay there.
We appreciate it. I think you being a landlord with over 30 units in Cleveland, your input and advice is invaluable, so please stay in touch.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question, Mr. Chair. So this legislation there's no limit to which this would come into play. So there's a chronically late tenant every single month. The landlord has no other choice but to file an eviction. Has to hire an attorney if it's an LLC. They have to pay court costs. They have to take time off of work. They have to potentially find ways to pay the mortgage for which they're responsible. And the tenant's rent is what enables them to pay that, as well as the repairs that are necessary to maintain a unit that's respectable, right? All that takes money. So if a tenant continues to be late every single month and the landlord's forced to go to court, loses money, because that tenant now, under this legislation, really is not going to make the landlord whole. And this keeps going on and on and on and on and on. What does that do to a good landlord? I mean, don't you think there should be a limit to which this can continue month after month after month after month and potentially put the landlord in a position not to be able to pay the rent or the real estate tax, and the house goes into foreclosure? And that's gonna impact good landlords, right? What's your opinion on that? About this being an endless cycle? And that's, in my opinion, not a way to stabilize housing either. But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I agree that there is a group of landlords out there that I think we don't know as much about as we'd like to. This sort of proverbial mom and pop running, 2 to 6 units, where cash flow issues are a constant threat. We can tell a lot of stories about them, but I think it is, as you've probably seen, hard to get more than anecdotal information about that. I do think their needs are really important because those folks grow into, some of them die out in the business, some of them grow into more substantial landlords running slightly more stabilized portfolios like I am. And, if we're trying to identify good practices, if we're trying to identify things that are going to stabilize folks in our community, we also do need to build in supports. And I don't think pay to stay is about knocking out support. I think it's about, as you heard, it's not used a lot. I mean, there isn't sort of a constant use happening because it's not a common practice to just jump the gun and throw somebody out because of all those costs. I mean, that's the whole point, is that if you're running a business trying to make money from your tenants, you're not going to say, oh, let's initiate a $2,000, $3,000 legal process at the drop of a hat. There's a very good reason to engage with folks and see if you can come to a common solution that's going to make you whole and prevent not even just the court costs, but turnover. Loss of rent. You're going to have vacancy. You're going to have all these different costs that start to accumulate after an eviction. And so, yeah, I think there are people who are high vulnerability landlords. It would be great if we were more structured in how we investigated, what are they dealing with really? And what could, a CDFI that could do a short-term zero-interest loan or something. There's tools that we could build out, but it's not clear to me that this is a systemic problem, at least in Cleveland. I don't know the data. Again, somebody else mentioned that it's not a ton of cases.
Well, I want to ask through the chair about the data about a systematic problem in Cleveland from bad landlords. I don't see the data on that. In fact, I think it's the opposite, that there's a group of bad landlords that just churn people out. Do you have data on that? Because what I'm hearing from you is there's no data to support that this would impact landlords when there's no end to it. But is there data showing that there's this terrible group of landlords that just take it upon themselves to put people on the street when the rent's being ready to be handed to them? Do you have data for that?
No, I'm not a data person. I do have a lot of, I live in Cleveland, so I certainly have seen my share of neighbors be evicted. I'm well aware that 1,500 kids a year are getting poisoned in Cleveland rentals. There's a lot of problems in Cleveland. Cleveland's got a huge stack of problems. And I think that in a lot of cases, landlords get a bad rap because they're kind of coupled with the outcomes of tenants on a lot of these really challenging problems. So I don't know. I think it's a mix. I think there's a lot of room for opportunistic actors in a place like Cleveland where there's a lot of vulnerability and low resource customers. But I don't have specific numbers there.
Thank you. And again, Cleveland has pay to stay, right?
Yes.
Okay,
it does.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Go ahead, Councilman.
The pay to stay in Cleveland, do they allow one-time use of it, or is it open-ended?
As I said, I haven't personally utilized or been in, hasn't been an issue for me, pay to stay, because I haven't had an eviction that was diverted from, so that's a question for legal aid,
Never actually had to use pay to stay?
No, in the normal course of my,
Has not had to use
right,
it.
in the normal course of my business, I would be inclined to engage with the tenant and find a way to make me and them whole without throwing them out as best to the best of my ability. If somebody's getting tossed, it's at some point, it's like at a point that's beyond that level of engagement. They're not showing up with the rent at the door.
And you said you have 33 units.
Yes, that's right.
How often, if at all, have you had to go to housing court?
It's pretty rare.
Rarity,
It's
or-
pretty rare.
Pretty rare.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty rare. Again, we are local, we're hands-on, we're a mom and pop shop, we know people, and it's a full-time business. I mean, again, to your point, like, I get that there's a lot of people kind of doing it on the side. I think that that's one of the challenges, is that it is, when you're dealing with a low-income population like the renters of Cleveland in a lot of cases, you have to be prepared. I mean, it's just responsible business ownership to be prepared to deal with realities on the ground. And so that's what we've invested a lot of our time into. That's what I'd love to be continuing to share with other landlords to help them navigate these challenges in a similar way. So,
So I hear you, you don't have to engage with housing court to any great regularity. And you may not even know the answer to this, but I'll just throw it out there. Those that are going to housing court, would you characterize them as small business at your size, 33 units in that area, or is it more the 2 to 6 that you describe? Can you give me any characterization of who goes to house? And again, it might not even be your world.
yeah,
you know.
I appreciate the question. That's kind of outside of my
Let's go.
wheelhouse a little bit. I think that,
Fair enough. We might have those in the room here who do
Yeah.
know that answer. So
yeah, I think it kind of comes on both sides. Again, I think that when you're looking at very small landlords, my experience is that there's a lot more vulnerability in both directions, both for that, like paying of that mortgage becomes, on one property, becomes like a business killer. On the other hand, if one unit goes vacant due to eviction and you own 3, you've lost 33% of your revenue. Whereas if you've got 50 units or 100 units and one goes off, that's 1%. I mean, that hit is totally different. So I think that the logics and the reasons people do things on the small end of the market are often very different and driven by like much different risk calculations. You get to some bigger operators, and I do believe that there are landlords in Cleveland who are taking advantage of Cleveland's tenants, especially some of these larger ones, underserving, providing low quality housing, and churning through evictions. So I think that, overutilizing housing court when you're a fiscally stable business who's just seen an opportunity to make some money off of vulnerability is frustrating to me because of the amount of energy I invest in doing things in what I feel to be the right way.
So you describe the concern as being from the landlords who are larger than yourself, not the small business, but the larger ones? Is that your characterization of it?
Yeah, I think it's like different problems. Again, I think that there's a fundamental challenge when you're dealing with low-income tenants that you have just scarcity in the mix, right? I mean, like a lower-income person means there isn't as much money in the ecosystem. And so any business relationship is dealing with that scarcity. And so on a very small side, it's like how are we allocating that out is a challenging operational question that somebody's wrestling with every day. Once you get to the really big side, if you're continuing to engage that population, in some cases you've sort of systematized how you cut, which corners you cut. And that becomes more of like a structured operation. So I think it's just different animals. I'm kind of in this weird middle space, the teenager of landlords, where I'm not quite a weekend guy and I'm not quite a corporation, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilwoman, did you have anything? We thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Hazel Remish.
Morning. I'm Hazel Remish. I'm the Director of State and Local Policy for Enterprise Community Partners. I wasn't actually planning on speaking today, but I wanted to come up and address, through the chair, the council president's 2 questions that he asked earlier today. As some of you might know, I spent about 15 years practicing landlord-tenant law with the Legal Aid Society before I joined Enterprise about 3 years ago to do state and local policy. And I spent some time at the State House in this role, really focused on anything that's touching housing, but specifically housing for folks who are the most vulnerable among us. The first question, through the chair, Council President, you asked about preemption. I wanted to mention that back in 2022, the state passed House Bill 430. That bill essentially says, and I'm looking at that on my phone, and I'm sorry, because I'm looking at my notes, that it aims to prevent essentially what they called as rent stabilization or rent control in that bill. And the definition of rent control in that bill is really focused around, it prohibits requiring landlords the law defines prohibited rent control as requiring below market rents. Okay, so that's essentially create a system where the landlord would be required to charge below the market rent. That's not the case in Ohio. The law right now essentially says that landlords can set their own rent prices, and that as long as they abide by the lease, they're allowed to raise those rents as long as they're abiding by the lease and providing the proper notices under the law. Pay to stay doesn't change any of that. Pay to stay doesn't say you're required to charge below market rent, you're required to charge X amount. It essentially says the tenant has to make the landlord whole by whatever the law that's been set by the landlord. So that's not in contradiction with House Bill 430. The other question, through the chair, to the council president was around cases that have challenged pay to stay throughout the state. And I wanted to mention one case out of Cincinnati where the court essentially, the tenant raised pay to stay as an eviction, as part of their eviction defense. The court did not enforce it, and then it essentially got appealed. And in that instance, the case ended up getting dismissed on other grounds, but the court had a lot of analysis around the enforceability of pay to stay and essentially decided that a tenant could use pay to stay, that it was a permissible defense, that the law was proper in that case. And that's out of Hamilton County. So I just wanted to mention both of those issues in response to the council president's questions earlier today.
Thank you, Hazel. I have a question. Do you have any information on Councilman Jones's question around the usage of pay to stay in Cleveland Heights? Is there a limit to people who can use pay to stay that you know of, or can people use it multiple times?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a chart that's been, that sort of analyzes, that was put out by an organization out in Central Ohio. It's a little dated, but it does analyze things such as whether there was a sunsetting of the ordinance and those limits that I'd be happy to pass on to council.
Appreciate it. Any other questions?
Through the chair, what happened in Hamilton County? I'm sorry. The lower court said they could not use the affirmative defense, and they
The
appealed it?
magistrate was refusing.
magistrate.
Yeah, was refusing to adopt a defense. The case ended up being dismissed on grounds unrelated to pay to stay. It was a notice issue. But within the court's decision, the court had some language around the analysis around pay to stay and what, you know, whether it was an enforceable defense and so forth. So,
Dicta.
yeah, but it was a more thorough analysis than your traditional dicta, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Hazel.
Thank you.
Nabal Ali.
Morning, my name is Nabal Ali. I am a real estate agent, property manager, and I also own several properties. I manage about 20 properties, and I have about 10 of my own. When this came across, the pay to stay, I wanted to be here. It's against the policy. It is, for me, as a property owner, I do work with my tenants. I definitely give them the opportunity, especially 90% of them are families. So we try to work together. But for those that don't want to work with me, and they try to go to court and do the pay to stay, what the courts don't understand is, as property owners, is that we have our mortgages, we have our taxes, our insurance, we still have to pay. I mean, no matter what, you know, obviously, you know, I'm working with all my tenants, you know, I have a good relationship with them. And I try to, I keep that, you know, I put myself in their position, you know. Single moms, you know, I'm a single mom, 5 kids. I was at that point in my life. So I do try to work with the families. So I thank God that have never had to do the pay to stay, you know, with any of my tenants because I have worked it out. But I do manage my property management company, so I have investors that may potentially soon be going through the evictions for a couple tenants. But their taxes are still due. Their insurances, their mortgages, they're still due, you know? And if we've gotten to the 3-month mark and we go to do the eviction, within those 3 months, we're not sitting down and twiddling our thumbs. We're trying to work things out with the tenant. But for me, if I have gotten to that point for an eviction, there's no hope. So for the court to come in and tell me, okay, well, we're gonna do the pay to stay, but what about the whole 3 months that I have tried to work with them and they didn't work with me? Now the courts wanna come in and they wanna tell me how to run my business? So I just don't feel that it is fair to do that. I mean, you know, again, I'm a mom and pop shop, you know, I'm small business. I do a lot of investors, but my investors, I mean, I run their properties. I work with everybody, you know, just because they're 1 day late, I'm not putting an eviction notice on them, you know. I've given them up to 3 months. I have literally one right now in Lorraine County where she is 3 months behind because she got cancer. I'm not gonna kick her out. But that's not my property. That's one of my investors' property, but he's tried to work with her. She's not willing to do anything. She's nothing, like, I've tried reaching out. So what happens now? You know, we go to court, we do the eviction, the court, I don't know what the court's gonna tell me, you know, will they tell me to do the pay to stay? But she had the whole 3 months that I'm trying to work with her, that she didn't even try to give me $1 towards her rent. Because if she tried to do the $1, I mean, I couldn't do the eviction. So I think the council needs to take our perspective and say, you know what, I mean, you know, if we can say, let's stop the tax bill from coming in and the mortgage from coming in, if the tenant's not paying, okay, well, I'm all for it. But if that's not the case, I don't think it's fair for us property owners, property managements, to take on that responsibility because those are our properties, and if we don't pay our mortgage, it goes into foreclosure. And then what happens? We lose out. We're trying to build up our business, you know, so I think it has to come down to, you know, a lot of the organizations I deal with are Section 8, Eden, Catholic Charities, all the refugee centers. I mean, my one tenant, again, she was on Section 8. They kicked her off, whatever the case may be. But now she's about to be homeless. Try to work with her. Try, you know, not just the owner or the landlord or the property manager. Help, you know, help her out. You know, it's not just up to us property owners. It's also up to other organizations to step in. Currently, I also have a family of 5 who was 3 months behind, which is in the Cleveland West Side. And I've tried reaching out to, you know, other organizations, Eden, Section 8, and they said, well, we can't help them unless they're homeless. I'm not going to kick them out. This is a family of 5. I mean, 3 young, and the father actually has a brain tumor, stage 4. I mean, it's crazy. Like, they won't help them unless they're sitting on the street. So I'm trying to work with them. So, I mean, that needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate you coming in today. Any questions? Councilman?
I don't know if so much a question as more of I asked an earlier question, if you're made whole, what's the problem, so to speak, if they're going to pay? And I think you've illustrated that sometimes it's more than just the dollar amount. What I'm hearing is sometimes the tenant themselves, the attitude that they bring to the table, things challenge you faced with over 3 months of attempting to work with a person. There are other factors that are more than just a tangible dollar amount as to why you might want to end the relationship at that time.
Well, if it's gotten to the 3-month mark, that means for me, I've already tried everything I can. So when it comes to the 3-month mark and I'm in court and the court says, okay, why don't you do the pay to stay? Well, are they going to reimburse me for the late fees of my mortgage not being paid for those 3 months? Or the taxes not being paid, or the insurance, the late fees for that? Or the bounce checks, if they're not paying, I'm still having to pay that, and then I'm getting short on it. I mean, if it's gotten to the 3-month mark, for me, I've already exhausted everything I can. Like I said, I'm not a property owner or a property manager where if you're 30 days late, I'm not gonna, especially a family, I'm not gonna kick you out. I'm gonna try to work with you, even if, give me $20 a week, something to help, to show me that you're willing to work with me. So yeah, like I said, you said it's not about the money, but for us, it is. I mean, we have late fees, we have a mortgage, we have everything that is coming out of our pocket at the end of the day. So if I've gotten to that 3-month mark and I'm gonna file that eviction, I don't want the court to say, well, give her another chance. Well, I've given her 3 months and I've gotten all these late fees because of her or him. So why should the court tell me how to run my business? That's, like I said, for me, the eviction is a last resort, and I have exhausted everything. You're welcome.
Well, we thank you for coming in. I think you have a great perspective, having a property management as well as rent a property, so we thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would like to, for the record, read the names of the people who submitted written testimonies. Alan B. Pintner, Seth Task, Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries, Akron Cleveland already spoke, Katie Bashia on their behalf, Adam Whiting, and AIY Properties.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
President.
Just want to comment that I've looked at the written testimony and people took time to provide very detailed information, both on the proponent side and expressing concerns. Four of the 6 letters express concerns about pay to stay, and I would just encourage my colleagues to take the time and read that written testimony, because it contains a lot of very good information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have read the written testimony that was sent in, and I have worries about one of them that brought up possibilities of this ordinance being in violation of possibly state law. And so I would hope that we could get a opinion from our law department before we meet again to discuss what the possibly going forward. So, but I do appreciate the people that sent the letters, and I appreciate everybody that spoke today. And but I would want to see an opinion from our law department.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Slepper.
Good morning, through the chair. I wanted to make a few comments about this. This is one of those tricky ones. I think it's really difficult because I think most of us can see both sides of the coin, which makes these types of things difficult. I kind of share Councilman Kelly's sentiments. You know, we need to know where the state stands on this. We need to understand, you know, what they have in line in terms of the law. Because I think that's obviously going to be really critical for us to look at. I think outside of that, I struggle with this because, let me just say first, I am in support of a pay to stay legislation. But I also think that both things can be true. I actually own an investment property myself, not in Cuyahoga County, it's in another county. I do not have tenants at the moment, but I guess I would be considered a small operator. You know, so I can see that. I can see what it means if someone doesn't pay, if they're 3 months behind. But I do think that this is a both can be true type of situation. I think that we can have these protections for residents. I think that's really important, while also bolstering, you know, the law in terms of what protections landlords have as well. One of the speakers today mentioned the idea of risk calculating. And I think this is an intersection between kind of human rights and business. And these are always tricky spots to be in. But at the end of the day, if you're a landlord, this goes with the territory, I think, right? You are dealing with folks that, you know, may lose their job, may have something come up in their lives. It doesn't mean that they're a bad actor as an individual, right? I definitely think that's the case. It's also worth saying that if someone is 3 or 4 months behind and they've shown no good faith effort to pay, chances are they can't pay. You know, and that's unfortunate. That's really, really tricky. And I think that's when we need to really lean on some of our rental assistance programs. We need to bolster those programs throughout the county first. And I think then we can, you know, support that. It's tough. I think also a prescriptive approach to things as opposed to a reactive approach. You know, if you're leasing to folks, and I know there's also legalities here, but making sure that you have, you know, if you're doing a background check on people, if you're checking credit scores, if you're looking at, you know, ability to pay from the beginning. Listen, I know things happen. I know that's really tough. I've been a tenant before. I've had really good landlords. I've had really crummy landlords that I've actually had to take to court because they kept a security deposit when they shouldn't have. And I've won in those cases. So I get all sides of the coin here, but I think at the end of the day, both can be true. But I will say that I lean certainly more toward a pay to stay. If you come to the table at 2 months and you're like, hey, I got most of the money, then cool. Here's most of the money. Let's keep it moving, right? We can figure out the rest. I appreciate the commentary about working with people, making sure, you know, I also see the other side. If you don't pay at all, you don't make any good faith effort, you know, hey, I can give you 500 this month, 800 next month, whatever that looks like. But this is a tricky intersection, and I think we need to really kind of pick this apart. My personal suggestion would be I support this with the potential addition of a guardrail that says you can use this provision twice or something like that, right? Both can be true here. And I think it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So that's just kind of my position on this, but I look forward to seeing how this proceeds.
Appreciate it, Councilman. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I've been a landlord, have a small number of properties over the years. Nothing like what we've heard today. Obviously a business owner in the funeral industry. I have tended to lean towards helping the small business owner in the way legislation has been built, and that has just been my experience over the years. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but my experience where law has been helpful to the customer and to the, I'm going to say, funeral home owner is in the way society has changed from burial to cremation. Okay? There was a preponderance of individuals who buried more so than cremated. Okay? But there's been a change in the last 20 years. The stigma around it has gone away. You know, at the time there was a stigma. We talked about it quietly, and it was hushed, and people did these things discreetly. And now I believe that stigma is gone. But there were some challenges that came with it. Once your loved one was physically in the ground, it was in the ground. But once it's above ground in terms of holding ashes, they became a football. And here's what I mean by that. Give just an example. A husband and wife, and the wife is a stepmother. She has been married for 30 years, but the children are 35, 40 from a previous marriage. She raised them from the ages of 5, 10, 15. But then you find out at that moment, when it's time for that cremation of ashes, then all of a sudden there became a battle. Everything went well during the arrangement, but then when it was time to get the ashes, they legally belonged to the wife. But the child is like, well, that's not my mother, and that's my daddy. And she would come into the funeral and pick them up because they were together and they seemed like they were getting along, but at the core, there was an issue. So the daughter got the ashes, and the wife said, I'm the wife. They were mine. Get them back. And now you're in a dynamic. You see what I mean? That's an emotional dynamic. Well, then all of a sudden, what happened was the laws weren't really in place. You didn't really think about it the first time it happened 20-some years ago. Well, now the state created laws that helped us, that supported the small business owner over the customer. And we built, paperwork was drawn up, documents. You have to sign, you have to get permission, and all these things were helpful so that those type of dynamics that came from the customer, okay, were addressed. That kept the customer safe, the wife and the daughter, and it kept the funeral home safe so that we didn't experience lawsuits. And there were multiple other examples around that. But again, my sense, my experience was that laws were meant also to help those small businesses, which is totally different from corporate America. We have two different dynamics, and these things are, my experience is, does this genuinely help the small business owner? Because we've heard, the people of color, but they're not only tenants, they are the landlords as well. So there's no side for the people of color, whether tenant or landlord, that's lean more. Are we making sure the people of color in the landlord position are also being put in the right position around this issue? So again, I'm still listening. I'm hearing, but I still have concerns. The smaller businesses, 2 to 6, how are they going to be impacted if what I'm hearing is some of the bad actors might be more at the corporate size? Do we want to make sure there are no unintended consequences for the small business owner? So I'm still, when we deal with these weighty, complex issues, sometimes it takes time to figure it out and make sure we understand what we're doing and what the unintended consequences are. So like my colleague, as you said, my leaning is more towards slowing my brakes a little bit on making changes to those 2 to 6 unit owners when I'm still not sure how they are going to be treated in this dynamic. So I'm still open to listening and hearing from more. I'm not sure if there are more individuals to speak who are against, who might be in that smaller realm, or who act as advocates in the community, who could articulate more so sometimes than just the regular small business owner who has more data and those things. And I know it was really open to everyone to come in, but hopefully, again, I can continue to hear a little bit more. So thank you.
Councilwoman.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the unintended consequences of this. There's a shortage of rental housing, good landlords, there's a shortage. And when we start meddling in some respects in the landlords who are actually responsible, who are dragged into court and never are going to be made whole by repeated late payers, it's going to actually reduce the number of available housing. People can't afford to buy homes right now. We want to make sure that there's housing available, and this is probably going to impact that negatively. And we've got to put the guardrail. I think one time is, if you guys want to do this, is more than enough to give people chances, because if there's repetitive lateness, that's a chronic underlying issue with being able to maintain that housing unit from the tenant, its ability, and that doesn't help. What this does is stopgap an inevitable outcome, and it hurts. It's it hurts the business owner by having good housing available. You start to reduce that housing, people are going to be more homeless people. So this is potentially going to negatively impact. I don't think we need it. The high concentrated area is Cleveland. But if everybody's gung ho with this and thinks somehow it's going to help, then we've got to put really strong guardrails because it's going to backfire. And we don't have the rental assistance we had. That was a COVID one-time thing where landlords were able to draw down on that and help because of COVID when people didn't have jobs and there was a lockdown. But that's all dried up. There is no assistance program to allow that, for protecting both landlords and tenants. We don't have that anymore. And I don't anticipate with the current administration at the top, we're going to see anything like that for a while. So those are my only comments. Thank you.
That actually led to a question I hadn't thought of. Who actually pays them to pay to stay? Who gives the landlord the 3 months and the court fees and everything? Who's actually providing that money? Who is?
Tenant.
Oh, the tenant. So the tenant has the money that haven't paid for 3 months. They apply for pay to stay, but now they have the money? Is that what happens?
I believe so. Go ahead.
Through the
Help
chair
me,
to
help me.
Councilman Jones, yes, that's what this says, is that for whatever reason, I think what the theory is to this, underlying the legislation is somehow the tenant wound up in a bad place, a short-term bad place, maybe lost a job, then got a job, and is able to come to court and say, look, I have the money now. It all comes from the tenant. And I think what's anticipated here is just as somebody who has bad luck for a couple months. That's what is the anticipated, I think, potential recipient of this benefit, but it would be the tenant.
My approach is that you have to protect for the lowest common denominator. And what I mean by that, if you work with the public, as custom, we all have different dynamics, personalities, experiences, and you can have a great customer, and you can have that customer from hell. That one that there's absolutely nothing you can do to make them happy, to satisfy them, and the guardrails ultimately have to be in place for that customer that makes things that there's no reasoning with some individuals. That happens. It happens. I've had an experience with. Well, no, I don't want to get into details. But there are times when a customer is just customer's not always right. And when they're not, the guardrails have to be to protect, again, the landlord when dealing with that customer that is not right. That's the lowest common denominator. So I'll leave it at that.
We appreciate it. Just in closing, I am in support of trying to keep people in their homes. I agree with Councilman Slepper that I think many of us can see both sides of this piece of legislation. I think it's ironic that we had two landlords come in today, both with two different point of views, one supportive and one non-supportive. And so just in closing, I want to thank everyone for coming in today. I know per the request of the sponsor, this item will be held in committee. And so seeing no other items on the agenda, I am calling this meeting adjourned.